Welcome to Lessons in Consciousness. This is part 3 of episode 5, where I'll continue talking about the location of consciousness. In the last part of this episode, I discussed the connection between geomagnetic activity and thoughts, even revealing research showing that psychic abilities can be affected by fluctuations in the Earth's magnetic field. I also mentioned something called circumcerebral magnetic stimulation and how it affects psychic abilities. Research led by Dr. Michael Persinger and published in 2002 in the peer-reviewed scientific journal Perceptual Motor Skills showed that circumcerebral magnetic fields placed around the test subjects' heads caused them to have enhanced psychic abilities, specifically remote viewing. Now, what is remote viewing? Well, it's simply seeking information about a distant, unseen place or thing using psychic abilities. Here's a quote from the journal. Remote viewing may be enhanced by complex generated magnetic fields designed to interact with the neuromagnetic binding factor of consciousness. So, a device around your head has been shown to enhance remote viewing ability. Now, believe it or not, you can actually order a circumcerebral electromagnetic stimulator device online. I found this one at altered-states.net. It's something called the Shiva Neural Stimulation Technology, and it can be yours for only $649. Well, I have no idea if it actually works, but I thought it was cool that you could buy one online. Now, the really interesting part of this technology, besides its supposed psychic enhancing ability, is that it interacts with something called binding factor. Now, what is this binding factor that they're talking about? Well, according to the theory, it's associated with the wave of electromagnetic energy that moves through your brain from front to back, caused by neurons firing in a pattern. This is also known as brain waves. This can be measured by an electroencephalograph, and when it's in the 40 hertz range, it's called a gamma wave. Now, this front-to-back gamma wave is thought to create the unity of conscious perception. In other words, how all the information coming in from your senses, like smell, taste, touch, sight, sound, they're all combined into a single, unified experience. According to Persinger, this binding factor of the gamma wave is actually inhibiting the perception of other information that's contained in the magnetic fields of the Earth. When circumcerebral magnetic stimulation is applied, it supposedly removes some of the inhibiting factor of the gamma wave and gives a person access to thoughts floating around in the Earth's magnetic field. Okay, that sounds pretty far-fetched, except that they got positive results that were published in a peer-reviewed journal. And if you remember the research I presented in part 2 of this episode, there's a lot of evidence that geomagnetic activity of the Earth affects thought and behavior. So, there is some connection, and it gives more evidence that thought can exist outside of your brain. In part 4 of this episode, I'll talk more about the evidence that consciousness is outside of your brain and body. I'm Dr. Bruce King, and you've been watching Lessons in Consciousness. All right, we're live. Welcome, everybody. I'm just going to make sure the sound works, and it does. So let me take these out of my ears and click over like that. What I want to do is review just a little bit of what we just saw there on the video. And obviously, I'm talking about location of consciousness being outside of the brain. And the brain is just an interface for consciousness. That's what all these episodes are about. But the reason I'm talking about all this electromagnetic stuff is because that might be the connection, and there's a lot of science that reinforces that. So I'm going to review a little bit about what I talked about in the video, and then go over the science a little bit. Now, this circumcerebral magnetic stimulator thing is pretty interesting. In fact, here, I'll show it. If I can do that. There it is again. This circumcerebral magnetic stimulator is supposedly affecting your brain waves. And the brain waves operate here. I'm going to come back to my regular picture here. These brain waves are operating, gamma waves is what they're affecting, operating at 40 hertz. Now, what is 40 hertz? Well, that's just 40 times a second. In other words, your brain waves in the gamma wave region or area are going from front to back of your skull at 40 times a second. Okay? Now, I think this is a pretty interesting idea that these brain waves are creating a binding factor that unites all five senses into one experience. Now, let me talk a little bit about binding factor because that's a very interesting aspect of this whole deal where this circumcerebral magnetic stimulator is changing the gamma waves and changing the binding factor. This may be a key to helping us understand how our consciousness is connected to outside our body. Let's talk a little bit about binding factor. Okay, you know the brain has been shown to have areas associated with certain sensory organs. For example, the ears pick up sound waves, right, and send an electric signal to an auditory center. In fact, let me show you. I'm going to show you on the internet. I found a picture of this here just to show you the auditory. I'm going to put that over here so you can see. I'm going to bring up the 3D view. There you go. Okay, now you can see it on your screen that there's actually a little area. See that little red area? I'm going to kind of go around it here with my cursor. You can see where I'm kind of jiggling my pointer here around this and cursor around that part of the brain. There's a specific area. Obviously, it says primary auditory cortex, and just to give the person who put the image up credit, it's Brodmann 4142. So anyway, it's on Wikipedia. So, but that's the area where your sound goes to. So that goes to a specific part of the brain. Okay. Now then you have other areas of your brain. In fact, I'm going to pull this up and bring up another area, the visual cortex, where you see something that goes to the back of your head. If you can see that on your screen, it's a little smaller than I like, and that's as big as it gets. Let me click on it, see if I can't bring it up a little bit. There we go. I can't blow it up anymore, I don't think. But that's where your eyesight is essentially going in your brain. Okay, and the same thing is true for your nose and all kinds of stuff. Let me see if I have that. No, I didn't have that. But anyway, the same thing happens with your nose and everything else. And that's going to all these different areas of your brain, okay? And your fingers are touching something, and that sends a signal to a specific area of your brain for your fingers. Now, all these areas are separate from one another. That's the important point I'm trying to make is your sensory organs, your smell, your hearing, your sight, touch, all that is going to different parts of your brain. So how do you connect all that stuff up? Well, that's where the gamma brainwave thing comes in, okay? That's the binding factor, the thing that unites all of these different sensory inputs. And here's an example. Imagine you're like at a Mexican restaurant and they bring a sizzling plate of fajitas, okay? Now, I'm a vegetarian, but anyway, it's a good example because you can hear it sizzling. So you're hearing it with your ears, and then you smell it with your nose, and you see it with your eyes, and then when they set the plate in front of you and you burn your fingers on the hot plate, you feel it. So all that stuff is combined because you know the smell, the sight, the hearing, you know all those things are associated with one thing, the sizzling plate of fajitas. So that kind of gives you an idea of how all that sensory data is united in your brain as these brain waves, the gamma waves, are going from front to back at 40 times a second, helping to unite all this information that makes it a unity of experience, okay? So hopefully that explains this binding factor. Now, what Persinger has done, Michael Persinger, the guy who did the experiments with the, I'm going to move this over, with the circumcerebral magnetic stimulator, okay, what he did is he slightly changed how these brain waves move in your brain from front to back. Now, his theory is that the gamma brainwave is somehow it's inhibiting your connection with the greater electromagnetic information located in the Earth's electromagnetic field. Now, I'm going to talk about that in a second, but I want to talk a little bit about what Persinger did. Now, his experiments showed that remote viewing got more accurate when they wore this device around their head. This thing, I'll put it back on the screen. This circumcerebral magnetic stimulator. Okay? This relates to the research actually done at Maimonides Hospital in Brooklyn, where they noticed that people got better at telepathy during periods of quiet solar activity. So there's some other evidence that these electromagnetic fields are affecting the way we think and affecting psychic ability. So there's some credence and validity to this because there's good research that shows this. So anyway, connecting it may be a little hard, but I'm going to present as much connection of the data as I possibly can. But anyway, how are brain waves affected by this circumcerebral device here I'm showing? And why does it seem to enhance our connection with some greater mind outside of our bodies? Okay, well, essentially, this circumcerebral magnetic stimulator is disrupting the gamma brainwave, right? That's the brainwave at about 40 hertz going from front to back of your mind and uniting all the sensory data so you know that the smell and the sight and the sound is all a plate of fajitas, right? Okay, it's uniting all that, but this magnetic stimulation interrupts that brainwave, okay? And it enhances more on the right side of the brain than the left. And that's what the EEG monitoring, or the electroencephalograph, okay, that's what they found with that. In fact, I'll show you a picture of an electroencephalograph in case you're not familiar. Let me see if I have that. Here we go. I showed it on the video, but just so you know, this is what an electroencephalograph looks like here. Okay, and this is a public domain picture, so I don't have to give credit to anybody. But you can see the picture of this guy. He's got all these sensory things on him. Well, what they found using this electroencephalograph along with the circumcerebral magnetic stimulator, I don't know how they got all that stuff in somebody's head, but what they found out was that the right brain was more affected than the left. In other words, it suppressed the left brain function, but it enhanced or removed some of the binding factor on the right brain. Now, I don't know how they measured that with EEG, but that's what they said they found, and they measured it empirically, so they didn't just make this up. They actually had good evidence. Now, what this reminds me of is a lady by the name of Jill Bolte Taylor. If you've ever heard of her, she did a TED Talk, which was very good, and she also has a book called My Stroke of... I can't remember the title of her book, but she does a TED Talk. Here, here's a picture of her holding the brain. This is a picture of her doing her TED Talk, which was presented by Steve Jurvetson, so you know who the author of the picture is. But here she is, Jill Bolte Taylor, and I highly recommend watching her TED Talk video. I think My Stroke of Insight, I think was the name of her book. But she had a left brain stroke, and she suddenly felt like she was connected to everything, and she felt a real oneness with everything, and she lost all the mind chatter in her left side of her brain. So I think that's significant that we are connecting here the dots between what happens with this circumcerebral magnetic stimulator, what happened to Jill Bolte Taylor with her left brain stroke is really the same type of thing, and that also happens with meditation. So there's three different things that happen: the left brain stroke of Jill Bolte Taylor, the circumcerebral magnetic stimulation of the device, and meditators. It all affects this left brain mind chatter. And when you diminish that, somehow it enhances psychic abilities or enhances our connection with a greater mind or a electromagnetic field outside of the brain and the body. So anyway, I think that's very interesting that all that seems to correlate with that data. Now, let me talk a little bit about some of the other research they did with this circumcerebral magnetic stimulator, since that seems to be the thrust of the show. And by the way, I'll go into more detail on this right brain thing, okay? I'm just sort of setting a foundation because there's a lot of information about how the right brain is affected by psychic abilities. And we'll get into that in detail when I start to get into more of the paranormal stuff and the psychic stuff like that, which is all based and validated with scientific evidence. So don't worry, I'm not going to get too woo-woo or make stuff up. I'm going to try to base everything I say on science, and my guesses included. But there was an experiment they did with this circumcerebral magnetic stimulator where they had one person with a stimulator on around their head that you see in the picture and another person with that EEG thing that I showed you earlier. And they were related. They were relatives. And what they showed was that changing the magnetic or the brain waves in one person affected the brain waves in another person that was related to them, that was genetically related. So I thought that was interesting, and that kind of shows that your thoughts affect other people, especially your relatives. Maybe that's why our relatives annoy us so much. I don't know. But that was interesting, and that was actually published in a peer-reviewed journal called Perceptual Motor Skills back in 2003. So, pretty interesting research. They've done a lot of other research on this. I really don't have time to get into on this particular thing, but I thought that was interesting, what they saw with that. Hang on just a second. I'm going to check the chat over here and make sure. Okay. Let me go back. Okay. Now, we're talking about Michael Persinger mostly and his deal that he has here with his circumcerebral magnetic stimulator device. And this is also the guy, by the way, that had the God helmet. You may have heard of that. That's where they put a helmet on people and recreated people's near-death experiences. That's for another episode, but this is actually the same guy. So in case you've heard of the God helmet, this is the same guy. Now, I want to get into a little bit more of the Earth's magnetic field. Okay, now here's a picture you can see on the screen of the sun hitting the Earth and solar flares affecting that. And I talked about that in the last episode. I'm going to shrink that down. But I'm going to try to connect up what's going on in the Earth's magnetic field and what's going on in the human mind. Okay, now I want to talk about extremely low frequencies, or electromagnetic frequencies. They're also called ELF frequencies, okay? And there's some pretty famous ELF frequency called the Schumann resonance. Now, what is that? The Schumann resonance is essentially caused by lightning strikes around. I'm going to put that up here. I'm going to actually play a little video here of what the Schumann resonance looks like. Let me expand it out a little bit so we can see it a little better. There we go. And this is an illustration of these lightning strikes. You see the little strikes on the Earth, and those are sending out electromagnetic waves, and that is the Schumann resonance, okay? It goes from about 3 to 60 hertz, but it appears at distinct peaks at about, there, that's enough, that's over. It appears in peaks at about 7.83 hertz. So when you hear a Schumann resonance, it varies, but the peaks are usually at about 7.83 hertz, or 7.83 times a second. Now, that's pretty similar to your brain waves in the theta or the alpha waves that are the lower, more rested, relaxed, meditative type of brain waves. Like right before you go to sleep, your brain waves slow down. Okay? Now, hey, who knows? Maybe the Earth has brain waves that are emanating from these lightning strikes. I don't know. That's just I'm just throwing that out there. But I think it's interesting that the Earth's main Schumann resonance is very similar to the same frequency of brain waves as the human brain. Now, does extremely low frequencies that are put off by the Earth, like the Schumann resonance, does that affect the human brain and human brainwaves? Well, research shows it does. In fact, researchers that investigated with EEG have reported that extremely low frequencies, and what they mean by extremely low is below 300 hertz, okay, or below 300 times a second is what they consider to be low frequencies. Now, there was a research published in a peer-reviewed scientific journal called Bioelectromagnetics in 2004. And what they found was that the resting EEG, or electroencephalograph, I'm going to put my camera back up. They found that the resting electroencephalograph is affected by exposure to a pulsed ELF magnetic field, or extremely low frequency magnetic field. Okay. Now, I'm just going to read a little bit from their report because it's very interesting what they found. Okay, I'm going to just quote their abstract here. It says, quote, "An increasing number of reports have demonstrated a significant effect of extremely low frequency magnetic fields on aspects of animal and human behavior." So there's been lots of other research, according to this journal article, that shows that the extremely low frequency fields, like the Schumann resonance in the Earth's magnetic field, affect animal and human behavior. Then they go on to say, recent studies suggest that exposure to extremely low frequency magnetic fields affects human brain electrical activity as measured by electroencephalography, specifically with the alpha frequency, which is an 8 to 13 times a second, or hertz, going through your brain. So, and then they go on to say, here we report that exposure to a pulsed, extremely low frequency magnetic field with most power at frequencies between 0 and 500 hertz is known to affect aspects of analgesia and standing balance. And it also affects the human EEG. So right there it shows that the Earth's magnetic resonance, or the Schumann resonance, or electromagnetic frequency, is affecting our brains and our thoughts and our brain waves, at least. And right here it says it affects aspects of analgesia and even standing balance. So that's very interesting that the Earth is affecting you in that way. So we know from research. So it's not just made up stuff, that we are connected to the Earth's electromagnetic field. It's proven through scientific research. So if somebody says, that's just a bunch of garbage, we're just standalone and we're not connected to anything or anybody out there. Well, the science proves that we're affected by it. Now, it's a lot harder to prove that our brain waves are affecting the Earth. So that's tougher because it's hard to measure that. And I don't know of any research that shows that, but it is interesting that we definitely can show that the extremely low magnetic frequency or electromagnetic frequencies that the Earth is producing are definitely affecting our brain waves, especially the alpha waves. So, also something very interesting about the electromagnetic activity of the Earth is there's an electric current that also runs around the equator of the Earth, and it's called the equatorial electrojet. In fact, let me try to find a picture of that, because this is kind of interesting. It really shows that the Earth is extremely electric. And I believe, in fact I know from the research, that we live in an electric universe. And the sun is actually an electrical effect and not necessarily a effect of nuclear combustion or fusion or fission energy. It's actually electromagnetic. And if you go and watch some videos like Thunderbolt of the Gods or The Electric Universe, there's lots of different videos and books out there that pretty much show that the universe is electric. I don't want to get into that in this episode, but I want to show you, though, one cool picture here. Let me bring up the window. This is just shows an illustration right here. I'll kind of run my cursor over so you can see this blue-colored area, and this runs from east to west. It is the equatorial electrojet. So it runs around kind of like the equator. Now, it's on the day side of the Earth because of the ionization aspect of the sun. I won't get into all that. I hardly understand it myself. I'm not an astrophysicist, but we can see there's a lot of electrical activity happening in the Earth's atmosphere and within the Earth's atmosphere that definitely could affect us and connect us, even not just to the Earth, but out to the universe. And I'll get into that in other episodes, how the Earth is connected out electrically with the rest of the universe. So this may be how we're connected to infinite consciousness. So watch the previous episodes if you're not familiar on the infinite consciousness. Now, why am I spending so much time on electromagnetism? Well, we know that reality is pretty much completely electromagnetic. Okay, in fact, the stochastic electrodynamics, which is just an offshoot of quantum electrodynamics or quantum field theory, is all dependent on the zero-point energy field, which I talked about in the last couple episodes. And that's, well, zero-point energy field is all about electromagnetic waves. Okay, and from atoms to stars and galaxies, really everything about our reality, in my opinion, is electromagnetic. Now, if we want to understand reality and our consciousness and the location of consciousness outside our body, we really need to understand as much as we can about the basics of electromagnetism. Okay, and like I said, the quantum field theory and stochastic electrodynamics, all matter is simply vibrations of universal fields. So, and I'm going to talk about that actually in the next episode. I'm going to talk about quantum mind, which is a theory of Stuart Hameroff, and I can't remember the other guy's name, but basically they believe that these quantum particles are what connect us, or what create consciousness, and I'm going to talk about that. But another interesting thing about the Earth, since I'm going to try to hit this stuff about the Earth's electromagnetic activity and stuff, and the weird things that happen on the Earth, and try to get past this, because I know this is going to be a little bit boring, a little bit dry, because you guys are interested in consciousness, and all the cool paranormal stuff, and I'm going to get into that, but bear with me. I want to talk about one other thing. Here, I'm going to change the camera. I want to talk about what NASA has found using their Fermi Gamma Ray Space Telescope, is that they've detected beams of antimatter that are produced above thunderstorms on the Earth. And this is a phenomenon they've never seen before, and I think it's pretty cool because thunderstorms are creating antimatter, which is, wow, that's crazy. We think antimatter is very hard to create. They create them with these, like the Large Hadron Collider and stuff, right? They do these crazy things with science, but it's very hard to create antimatter. I'm not going to get into antimatter that much, but I think it's interesting that the Earth's atmosphere is producing this stuff. In fact, hang on, I'm going to show a little quick video that's public domain here, and it shows where these antimatter particles are produced, and it produces up to like 500 of these a day. Now, remember I talked about the electrojet, the equatorial electrojet that goes around the Earth? Well, check and see where all these antimatter particles are being created and that have been detected above thunderstorms on the Earth. Looks like it's all around the equator of the Earth, right where the equatorial electrojet is. So I think that's kind of interesting. And maybe the Earth, okay, that's the end of the video, but maybe the Earth has a quantum mind just like your human brain has a quantum mind. And we can see that the Earth is emitting gamma rays or antimatter in relation to these thunderstorms, and these antimatter emissions are occurring along the equatorial electrojet. So we'll see. I'm going to get into that in more detail, but I just wanted to leave you with some of that information. I'm going to put the camera back on me. And these Earth's electromagnetic fields might be connecting us to a larger web of energy throughout the universe. If you're interested in more information on that, Itzhak Bentoff's Stalking the Wild Pendulum might be good. Okay, thank you, Lobo. I'm reading the chat room box finally. It says, consciousness is cool and all, but this is actually super interesting. So thank you, Lobo. I'm glad. I think it's fascinating myself because there's not very many people talking about this stuff. You can't find this on television. This is not on PBS. This is not being discussed in college classrooms that I'm aware of. There may be a few people sitting around, maybe a couple of quantum physicists or some people at the Noetic Center or a few places, but this is, not many people are talking about this stuff, and this is really interesting because the implications of this are, of course, that we're all connected and that our thoughts do make a difference, and what we think is going to change the world. And that's why this show is on the Conscious Resistance Network. It's because it is a lot about consciousness and how we think, and our thoughts not only affect our bodies, they affect other people, and they affect reality in general. And that's the main thesis statement, or part of the thesis statement for this entire show, Lessons in Consciousness. And what I'm going to continue showing you in future episodes is that not only is consciousness located outside of your body, but your consciousness affects your body, other people's bodies, and reality in general. So how you think matters, and I'm going to continue giving techniques and other things in more episodes. So I appreciate everybody watching. I'm going to go ahead and sign off here. I see it's 8:31. But I also want to thank Neil Rademacher for the technical production. Thank you very much. He also spruced up our website, so if you haven't seen the new improvements on the website, I encourage you to go over and check that. Also, don't forget to watch Derek Brose's show on Sunday night at 8 o'clock, the Conscious Resistance Show. So he always has great guests, and I'm not sure what's going on this Sunday, but it's always good. And next week, be sure and tune in Wednesday night. Invite your friends. I'm going to talk about quantum mind. So thank you very much for having me, and I will see everybody next week. Good night.